I'm going to just talk about a couple of things which are relevant to the report card from the point of view, first of all, of family incomes, secondly from the point of view of changes to government policy in spending and taxes and benefits. So where we started, I think is where we are at the moment is in a cusp between two governments, but also between two economic situations and circumstances. So over the last decade or so, things have genuinely got better for families. Child poverty has fallen really quite significantly, not quite as much as the last government was targeting, but by significantly more than 1 million over a decade. And it's fallen entirely because of the significant increases in benefits that were spent by the previous government, and particularly child tax credits. In fact, had it not been for the more than 10 billion increase in spending on those credits, child poverty would actually have risen. So we've gone through a period where child poverty has fallen, and it's fallen because of big increases in social security benefits. We've gone through a period of year-on-year 4% real increases in spending on education. We've gone through a period where we've come from towards the bottom of the European scale in terms of what we spend on preschool children, actually towards the top. We've also gone through a period of, not dramatic, but year-on-year, some real increases in incomes for people across the distribution. So we've come through a period of a decade or so where things are not brilliant, but things have clearly got better for families and for many other groups of the population. What's happening now, of course, is rather the reverse, and this is where a lot of the worries start, and it's the reverse in three ways. First, what's happening to families' incomes? Well, two things are happening to incomes. The first is that earnings, in real terms, are falling. Incomes by about 2014, we think, on average, will be no higher than they were in about 2002. That is the first time, at least since the 1970s, and possibly since the 1940s, that we've had a world in which incomes over more than a decade have not risen. And they won't have risen over that period because real incomes last year in 2010-11, this year in 2011-12, and next year in 2012-13 will have fallen. And those incomes will have fallen across the distribution. They'll have fallen particularly for families dependent on benefits. They'll have fallen particularly for families dependent on wages in areas where those wages are not rising. So the first thing that's really hitting families with children, but not just families with children, is a fall in real living standards. On top of that, we're also seeing that inflation, whilst not only relatively high, is unequally distributed. That is that energy prices, gas and electricity, and food prices are rising much more quickly than other prices, and that's hitting all of those towards the bottom end of the income distribution. So earnings are falling. There are cuts to benefits. Let me say a little bit about the cuts to benefits. I think, given that we're in a world in which overall there are big cuts in public spending, it is not the case that benefits are taking an unequal share of that. If you take the fact that there are big cuts in public spending, there are not unreasonably or unfairly big cuts in benefit spending. If you look at benefit spending, there are three big groups of recipients of benefits. The biggest group are pensioners. About 40% of all benefit spending goes to pensioners. The next biggest group are families with children. And then there are a relatively smaller group without children. This is a lot of the disability benefits go to families without children, some unemployment benefits, a bit of housing benefit. But the two big groups, pensioners and families with children. Now what's really interesting in the political decisions that have been made is that there are increases in benefits for pensioners and significant cuts in benefits for families with children. Now it's a big political decision that's been made about the distribution of benefit cuts. I think there's a really interesting debate to be had about the generational impact of those. Now, the cuts to families with children, freezes in child benefit clearly, but also some cuts in tax credits, cuts in housing benefit. and a cut in the way that benefits are indexed. Actually, that change in indexation is the biggest of all the changes to the benefit system, relatively new, but will be saving $5 billion a year by 2014-15. Finally, what's happening, of course, is changes or cuts to public services. Now, again, I don't think this is the place to have a conversation about whether cuts of this scale are necessary. We clearly start from a dreadful fiscal situation. Cuts of some significant scale clearly were inevitable. And the question is, are these cuts hitting families with children more than other groups in the population? Well, I think to be honest, I think you'd be hard-pressed to claim that they are. Which of the departments who have got the biggest cuts by far? DEFRA, Business Innovation and Skills, the Home Office and Ministry of Justice are all suffering cuts of more than a quarter in real terms over the next 4 years. Schools at early years and the health service are not suffering significant cuts over this time. Now, there clearly are two areas where there really are very dramatic cuts, which will have an impact on families. The first of all are really big cuts in the housing budget, the social housing budget. And I think if I had a quibble with the relativities in the scorecard, I think the family-friendly infrastructure scoring better than the service provision feels to me probably the wrong way around, because the really big cuts, I think, are in the infrastructure, in the housing area as far as it impacts families. The other, of course, is in local government services, where sitting at the centre, it's hard to know exactly where, how those are going to impact, but clearly they're going to impact to some extent, or some significant extent on families. So overall, everyone is sharing in the pain going forward. Families with children are suffering quite significantly as part of that. I think from the central government spending probably less badly on health and education and so on than they might have been. And I think there is a really interesting and undiscussed issue actually about the generational impact of some of the changes in benefits.